And
you don't have to submit testing now?
It's crazy. The landscape is changing, which I think will make a lot of students and parents even more worried, to be honest. Right? Yeah, I mean, for a parent, you're like, what the heck? What do I need to submit now to be admitted to a school?
在刘威来之前，先感谢我们今天的合作伙伴。威德益生菌保护力配方，现在年纪越来越大，还有了重要的家人们开始更重视健康的问题，身体有保护力才能更好照顾家人。像解封之后，大家就开始出国飞来飞去啊，社交活动也变多，所以风险也变高。那我跟 Megan 就会更小心注意，平常会吃多一点健康的食物，或是 health supplements。像 Weeder Probiotics Ultra Shield Formula 就是很好入门的一种，大人还有小朋友都能吃，它可以让我们的保护系统更强壮，对出关一些不舒服的情况都很有帮助。简单来说，身体里到处都是帮助我们抵抗外在风险的士兵，消化道就是这些士兵的 home base。威德的5种保护型益生菌能帮助增加士兵的数量，让他们更好的工作。然后还有2种强化成分，一个是 boysenberry， 就像它的保护罩，可以持续士兵的战斗力；另一个 Wellmune 就是强化的 weapons， 让士兵更快的打击外来威胁。我今天还没有吃，我想说先来一包。我其实已经吃了几个礼拜了，我觉得蛮好吃的。
对了，威尔还专门给配对独家优惠，而且只要购买就有机会抽日本双人机加酒。
详细资讯都在我的 IG， 所以千万不要错过。OK， 刘威应该快到了，今天就可以带着满满的保护力开始。
我在配的，我是刘沛 Pierre，
我是刘威。
大家，我们今天这支影片非常特别，因为我之前有拍过2支影片，是我如何考进 USC。不少配对问我，你们能不能够再解释更多？那我想说，很多人都问我，还不如专门拍一支影片给你们看。那刚好就邀请我弟，因为刘威，你的工作是什么？
我工作是帮学生申请去上美国的大学，
没错。So 我们这期影片会是全英文，那当然也会有专门的字幕。Before we start, if you guys are interested, Stanley has a website and Instagram, everything links are down below. Okay?
I have experience just working at selective universities, so I think most of my advice is geared towards.
So that. Selective, as in like freaking what, 2, 3, 4%?
Oh, I mean, the previous place that I worked at was around like 6, 7%. But so yeah, it's very, very low.
So basically, this video is going to be about how to get into Harvard, Princeton, Yale, that type of.
We can try.
So I'm a high school student right now, right? Mm-hmm. What are the things that I need to prepare to be able to apply for a US university?
Yeah, I think if you are considering a US university, it's very difficult, I think, for a student maybe in Taiwan or maybe just in
a non-US country.
Yeah, where applying to college is mostly based on a test that you have to take, right? For US universities, the admission process is what we say holistic, which basically just means that there are many different factors that equates to your admission to that university. So things like test scores, we look at things like your GPA. These are things we can say are more quantitative. The testing, right, if you choose to submit it or not.
And you don't have to submit testing now?
It's crazy. I feel like for us, it was all about testing.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's say I took the SATs. I don't have to submit that score?
Yeah, if you feel like that's not an accurate representation of your aptitude, I guess, you just don't need to submit it.
Aren't those tests basically to standardize your aptitude, right?
Right. That was the idea.
But now you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, there was a shift already in a lot of schools kind of going test optional, even before the pandemic. And then I think the pandemic really accelerated a lot of schools thinking about the value of a test score. So
this is blowing my mind.
I know.
You didn't tell me this before we made this video.
Yeah, a lot of schools are keeping now because their policy was, we're gonna go test optional for the next 3 years. Well, the 3-year mark is already here. So a lot of schools now are saying, yes, we're gonna keep it indefinitely. Wow. There are some schools that are now requiring the test again, like MIT, for example. Their faculty did their research and they value test scores in first-year admissions. But those are more technical institutions, right? Those are schools that are mostly STEM engineering geared, right? The landscape is changing, which I think will make a lot of students and parents even more worried, to be honest.
Because you don't have a goal, right? Now it's like, you don't necessarily have to submit that score.
Yeah, I mean, for a parent, you're like, what the heck? What do I need to submit now to be admitted to a school if you don't need to submit a test score anymore?
So what about non-quantitative?
That's one factor. The other factors are more qualitative stuff, like your application, so your essays, your short answers, things like your activity summary, your letters of recommendation. Those factors are also equally, I think, honestly, more important than just the numbers aspect.
Okay, so then when a university looks at an application, maybe tens of thousands of people applying, right? I thought it was, okay, let me check these test scores and then let me see their GPA, and then we'll start from the top and then we'll pick out from people who have good essays, letters of recommendation, and activities and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So that is sort of like the conversation starter, I would say. If I'm a school, like whatever top rated school, I see that you have a 1.5 GPA, right? Things could attribute to that 1.5. Maybe there's some family issues or something like that. That's why there's never really cutoffs in terms of like a GPA range. But yes, obviously that's the conversation starter, right? It'd be hard for me to present your application to our committee if you have that GPA, because, you know, yes, you may be an all-star in all these other qualitative aspects, but if we think you might come to our school and just not be able to survive that first year academically, then there's really sort of just kind of ends there, right? So like the quantitative aspect, the numbers part, I think what's hard for students to understand sometimes is, you know, to be honest, everyone who applies to these top schools, they all have 4.0 GPAs.
Yeah.
They all are taking rigorous courses. They all have, you know, only gotten A's in their life. Maybe they did do a test score and it's a perfect score.
1600, 1600.
There are thousands of students, thousands who are like that.
Okay.
Which is why it's like, I feel like I'm kind of jaded now, because when people say they have these numbers, I'm like, okay, that doesn't really mean anything to me because
you've seen like thousands of people who are, right?
And it's hard for a student to conceptualize that because they're in their own little bubble. They're worried about their stuff. But when you think about all the other students that are applying
from around the world, because it's not just in terms of qualitative aspect, those are things that I can set myself apart, right?
Yes.
So let's just start with activities or extracurriculars. What are some advice that you would give?
When I used to work at the colleges that I was at, I'd always get families coming in and sort of asking, oh, my son's doing basketball for 3 years, but they're going to quit their senior year. Will that look bad in their application? Or they say something like, I know a friend who did 2 internships already. My student only has 1 internship. Will that affect? And to be quite honest, for me, I'm like, if they're doing something, that's great, right?
So they don't care about consistency, or?
So again, when we do these holistic review, right, we're considering all these aspects into your admission. Things can happen. I can do basketball for 3 years, but then I have to take care of my grandmother 1 year. So that's why we can never say something like, oh, you have to do something for 4 years, because not everyone can physically do that sometimes. If you look back, right, what's the reason for a student to do all these activities? Why should I do an internship? Why should a student want to maybe do summer research, right? It's not because it looks good on an application, right? We don't sit down and count how many internships you've had already. You're doing it for the experience, right? You're doing it to make yourself feel uncomfortable, right? Because that's how a student starts developing and growing, which in turn will translate into a more dynamic person into our campus. My point is more like, there is no prescribed curriculum, there is no number of internships or volunteer work you have to do. I encourage you to do things every year that make you uncomfortable, because maybe you can write about that in your essay, right? Senior year. Maybe you start thinking about different ways of how the world works, which makes you a more interesting person in your essay.
Okay, so here's the thing. I think that's great advice to grow as a person, right? But the thing is, if I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do, then how will I actually set myself apart from everyone else? Because I know what you're saying in terms of like, don't compare yourself with someone, but the thing is, everyone in my school is my competition. So maybe there are 1 or 2 spots to Harvard from my school, and they'll only accept the top 1 or 2. How can I defeat them if I'm taking your advice of like, I only did 2 years of basketball, I don't want to continue?
Honestly, I feel like that was the beauty of admissions, like when I used to read applications, right? So when I used to read, let's say, a school group, and there's 30 kids in that high school applying to the school that I was working at, for example, like maybe choose the one that I want to admit, or choose the 2 that I want to admit, right? It's, again, I've never boiled it down to counting activities. I've never boiled it down to, you know, seeing, oh, this student did 4 years of something, but they didn't.
I see what you mean.
I'm gonna, you know, like, it's never been like that. It's all about the entire package, right? So a student who might look really good, at who I really want to push for admission, might be that student with that 4.0 GPA, the top test score, but also they do something so interesting. Maybe it's basket weaving, because that's what they did growing up, and that's
something completely different, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be different, but it's more so like, you know, all these different components are starting to add up into such a strong and compelling student, right?
Okay.
Yes, you should do activities because most colleges want community engagers and community builders. And that's not to say that you should just be at home all day and not want to participate in something, right? So, yes, it's still valuable, but it never goes down to that minutia of counting how many you have, right? It all goes into like, you're doing all these interesting things, is leading you into such an interesting person, which hopefully we're seeing that in your essays. And it's like, oh, and you have all these quantitative stuff as well. Wow, like you're starting to look maybe like the student we want to admit. The parent wants to hear, oh, do this, do that, do this, right? Yeah. So like do 4 years of this, get this number.
Take this class.
Yes, take this class.
Join this club, start this club.
Yep, unfortunately, selective universities, there is no prescribed curriculum of how to get admitted. Just to show you how sort of weird it is, right? We have students that we admit 1 year, and let's say they decided they just wanted to take that year off. They want to reapply to colleges next year. That same student who reapplied, we might deny that the next year.
Oh, what?
Because the pool is different.
Is there anything that I need to be aware of, or is there a direction that I should look towards when I do this?
Yeah.
Because if there's no solid thing of like, okay, I need to take this class, because every year is so different, right? So then what about the essays?
The most compelling essays and the strongest essays I ever read are the ones that are the most reflective in terms of like, whoa, I really understand how the student thinks, right? We're trying to see how you think, right? Which is very meta, and the only way to really do that is by writing a very reflective essay. Meaning like, you get 650 words to write an essay. Some people might just use that entire space to tell us a story about something that happened to them, which is fine. I think that shows that you're a strong writer and maybe you can be a novelist one day, right? But it doesn't give us much of the sort of excitement about the type of student you might be at our university, right? When you think about a college, everyone is unique, everyone is different, right? We don't want all the same students. But if you write an essay that's about volunteering, that's super reflective and gives us a really good insight into how you think, what's important to you, those are much more exciting for us to read.
I see.
So like the topic, who cares? Like we don't really care about the topic. You can write about, I don't know, paint drawing on a wall, right? I read an essay of a student talking about how they got locked in a bathroom, and I thought that was such a great essay.
Wait, that's hilarious.
I know, because they
got locked in the bathroom.
Used that entire time to really just give me like their introspection. Like they really reflected on that situation, and they talked a lot about different like other things that I would not have thought about at all, right? So that was really interesting.
So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not really sure, but when you combine the quantitative with the qualitative, so you have your scores and you have your essay, your activities and everything, right? Is that so that you can get to an interview?
Yeah, there are schools that allow students to do things like an online interview or an alumni interview. And it's a good sort of way for the admission office to get to know you on a more, like qualitative aspect. But to be honest, those aren't very big factors in the admission process now. I mean, things could change in the future, but as it stands now, they're more like just another letter of recommendation, right? As we're reviewing what's on your application, what you submit to us, that is what we're using to sort of determine whether or not you're a good fit for our school. A lot of schools will talk about fit. If you're like a very awkward person, you can write in your awkward way. That's totally fine, right? If you're a funny person, you can be funny in your essays, right? That's great because that will show us who you are. But if you're not funny, maybe don't.
Force the
don't do any.
Don't write any jokes that. Okay.
Yeah, it'll just be awkward for the both of us.
You're reading and you're like, I'm awkward.
Yeah, you're like, what the heck?
After I watch this video, what can I take from this? Like, what can I actually do? Is there something that I can go and focus on?
Like, if I had a kid right now who's going through this process, I think the first thing I would tell them is just don't compare yourself to the people at your school. First of all, that would just get you really stressed and kind of caught up in your head. And second of all, the people at your school, like, yes, they might be applying to some of the same schools that you're applying to, but there are thousands of students all around the world applying to that same school that you're applying to. So there's no reason for you to stress about comparing yourself to maybe that top student at your school, right? Obviously, do the best you can in your courses. If you decide to take the SAT or ACT, do the best you can, right? I think the qualitative aspects are much more important in a selective school's admission criteria, meaning your essays and short answers. Those are really important into sort of giving us that slice of your life. For those essays, there is no perfect topic, right? There is no perfect hook, right? You don't need to find that quote and put it on the very first couple lines, right? The essays are your time to really be reflective. And I think, again, this is just my own philosophy, for students to be reflective and to be mature and to be quote unquote interesting, I think it starts with 9, 10, and 11 where you're going to try out different things, be uncomfortable, because that is really how you start growing and kind of seeing the world differently. And that will lead to those strong essays, which if you're a freshman right now watching this, do something that you normally wouldn't do.
Jazz band.
Yeah, even if it's for a week or two, right? Obviously your best application is your genuine self.
I have a question about the essay.
Yes.
I still am a horrible writer, right? So like, I think I express myself better through person-to-person interaction. How can I be able to paint myself through the essay if I can't even write?
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's something that some colleges are looking into. So like some schools that are selective, you can submit a portfolio or you can submit a 1-minute clip of you, whatever, right? So, you know, schools are getting more innovative and you know, who knows, maybe more schools will adopt to this. But again, it comes down to sort of manpower, right? Like if you're getting 100,000 applications, it's just very difficult for the college to have that staff.
That's right.
Yeah, that's gonna be important, but don't stress too much about making sure it all has to be perfect.
Like if I just do speech to text, for example, on my phone, and then I go back and edit that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to start, yeah.
If I don't take these tutors, I will be at the bottom of my class. I will have a lower grade, especially if the grade is weighted. I'm taking these tutors so that I can actually be competitive with my other classmates. I won't have time for these extracurriculars. Is it better to keep it that way, or is it better to just be like, you know what, I'm okay to have a lower GPA, lower grades, but at least I can have all these other, you know, as you said, like these qualitative aspects, clubs, activities, be able to write in my essays. In
those situations, when you see admission rates that are 5, 6, maybe 4% kind of is starting to show in that example, right? So like you mentioned that genius who doesn't need to really have that tutor and extra help, also able to free up space for all their activities, like that might be the student XYZ school admit. And then if you're that student who might need to have a lot of
to juggle these things, right?
You might not be that student who is admitted, right? So I think this goes back to if you think about your colleges and you're making a college list, right? Most students obviously are applying to more than one school. Maybe some students have a dream school, schools they really want to get into, schools that parents might really want them to get into. I think that starts creating this idealistic hope of like, I have to get into this school or nothing, right? It's never really about one place that's a good fit for you, right? There's many different schools, and that's why you apply to more than one school so that you can have these chances of admission. There's never really one reason why you got in or why you did not get in, because I don't want people to think, oh, you have to be a genius now to get into school.
I see. So grades still kind of matter, right?
We want to make sure that your grades are there, right?
So that's like a baseline kind of thing, right?
That's why I kind of just throw it away, because it's you either have or you don't. Because if you have strong essays, strong activities, but your grades are just not strong, we will deny you.
Oh,
right?
man.
Like it just is not going to happen.
So you just have to have both,
right? Because again, we have other students who have both, so we'll just admit them.
Because I think a lot of people, especially in Asian schools and stuff, it's so much about your scores, your test scores, your grades and stuff that you don't really have time for other extracurriculars. If you want to apply to a US university, would you recommend then kids to, let's say their grades are okay and they go to tutor, but because of tutor and the grades and stuff, they don't have time for extracurriculars, so they should work towards trying to get more extracurriculars as well. Are they then working double hard to be like, well, I have to go to tutor to help me with my grades, but then I also want to do extracurriculars as well to be able to get accepted to US schools?
Yeah, but like, see, so that's the thing about extracurriculars. It doesn't have to be something, like if you don't have the time for it because of tutor, that's totally fine. You can write that in your application, right? Because again, it's not black and white, right? It's all based on context. So if that's your situation, you know, you can do extracurriculars that aren't sort of tied to a program or school or some sort of internship or research, right? If you like to write, what's to stop you from writing, I don't know, 10 minutes before you go to sleep every night, right? Like that's something that is important to you and can contribute to your development.
But it doesn't show up in the application though, right?
Maybe on your application, it only lists one activity, right? Which is then where the admission officer will go into the additional info section and see why, like what context there is.
I didn't expect this because I have no experience in this obviously. And I also thought that maybe there was like user manual that I can follow these directions and I can get into this university. But it seems like what you're saying is that every university is different. Every year is different.
Yeah.
Every single thing that they look at might be different. It's not just the grades, it's not just the extracurriculars. But I think today I did learn if you do want to apply to top selective U.S. universities, you really have to have both. And I also did learn today, if someone's doing an internship or like if they do 4 years of one thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to do it as well.
Yeah.
But what I knew from the beginning was that I do have to at least be doing something.
Yeah. I mean, you can have really strong grades, and that might mean when you come to our school, you'll do really well in our classes, and you will not fail, right? But then what are you going to do outside the classroom? How will you challenge our students? How will you challenge our professors? How will you be involved in our community? That's where the other aspects of your application will hopefully give us an idea.
Well, I think if people are interested and you want to actually know specifically your own situation, you guys can check out Stanley's own website. It's down in the link. And then I guess one last thing before we leave, what do you think about AI writing essays, college essays?
Oh my god.
Because AI is crazy right now.
That was one thing that was starting to get talked about a lot during my last year at my previous institution. Luckily I didn't see that when I was, because ChatGPT didn't come out yet. But now that it's out, people are like telling ChatGPT to write their college essay for them.
It's crazy.
It is.
Wait, but you can't tell that it's.
You can kind of tell still, and I think there are certain things software that you can use to see if it is.
Yeah, but what if I edit a ChatGPT essay? Do you know what I mean?
Gosh, yeah.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, don't give them that idea.
Okay, never mind. Hey, maybe.
But again, right? Because we asked for many different components in the application, it's not just your essay that will get you into a college. There are still ways to safeguard it for now. But who knows? Maybe 5 to 10 years from now, maybe interviews might be super prevalent in a lot of admission practices.
Dude,
maybe
that's a way to get rid of.
Maybe something else will change, right? So, I mean, 10 years ago when we applied, right? Like, we would never think, testing would be optional. But
yeah, that's crazy.
But now it's the norm, right? So.
It's crazy.
We'll see.
Thank you, Stanley, for coming on.
Feel free to email me, even if you have just a simple question.
Instagram as well.
I'm happy to, if you just want a quick chat about anything, feel free. Yeah.
All right.
Happy to help.
Hopefully this video has helped some of you. I hope that you can see how different college admissions can be. Not one size fits all type of thing. I hope that it'll change your perspective on when you apply to universities in the US.
你最棒。
记得按铃铛。